Studio Super, thank you very much. You said you mentioned in your previous stream about archetypes. The Frontiersman, I talk about archetypes a lot, obviously, scholarship. The Frontiersman is one that admittedly is hard for me to grasp a bit. Do you have any scenarios on hand that can better illustrate the function? Yeah, I mean, the Frontiersman, basically, you need to know about the Frontiersman and that he's about straddling boundaries. What I mean by that is that a good example of the Frontiersman I teach in my class, for example, is I look at Hawkeye from The Last of the Mohicans, how he's a white man, and in the book he calls himself a man without a cross, a man without a cross, and a lot of people get excited about that. Ooh, he's a man without religion. No, he's not saying that. He's saying he's a man without any other bloodlines. You know, he's not like half Indian, half, colonist. No, he's all white, yet he's raised by the Delaware Indians. So he's got those two worlds within him. And a lot of heroes come from two worlds. That's fine. But the thing about the Frontiersman is that both of the boundaries around those two worlds are totally preserved, so that he's got 1 foot in one and 1 foot in the other. So in The Last Mohicans, for example, if you read the book, he'll say, "Oh, I can track really well here because of my Delaware upbringing, or I can do this because of my white English blood, or whatever." And the Frontiersman has to have 1 foot in each of those boundaries, because the Frontiersman needs to inhabit an in between space to make it safe. So the Frontiersman stories are take place where there's been some sort of shakeup, or something's happened in the story universe where there's this new territory that's unsafe, and the Frontiersman comes in to make it safe. So you have stories about Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, even though they're real people, but you got fictionalized stories of them, Hawkeye and whatnot, on the actual literal American frontier in the early American times. That goes all the way to the cowboys, in the Wild West. The regulators, and whatnot. A lot of the great Wild West stories about people, because that's a lawless area, right? The nation was expanding, and civilization really hadn't, for good or for bad, sometimes both, hadn't really tapped into everything yet. So you had this sort of lawless land where a cowboy or some kind of, frontiersman hero, gunslinger or whatever, had to have kind of 1 foot solidly rooted in, let's say, the frontier life, the plantation life or whatever, really knowing the land or something like that, and then 1 foot, rooted in civilization of some way. That's why I love the Lone Ranger film, because it really embodied that well. Lone Ranger stories, even classic Clayton Moore Lone Ranger stories, they're frontiersmen. Like I said, I think you could look at the Young Guns movies, to a certain degree. Certainly Tombstone. My goodness, if you haven't watched Tombstone, you'll put some hair on your chest. That's an amazing frontiersman movie. So you got Wild West, then certainly into space, right? Star Trek, when it first came out, was a frontiersman story. Going into the final frontier, space. Green Lantern stories, when done well, are frontiersman stories. Where you have a character embodying these two, 1 foot in each boundary, or in each world, and using the gifts from each one to help him in the other. In making that in-between space safe for people. Hopefully that's the dime store version of the Frontiersman. Hopefully that works for you. But thanks for the question. I appreciate that. Studio Super, thank you very much there. Said, so the Frontiersman in a story can come from one world with certain values and comes into a new world that has different values, and those values can clash. The Frontiersman has those values coexist. Yeah, they can clash. I mean, think about Hal Jordan, Green Lantern. He's an Earth. He's from Earth. He's a human, and he's got that world. 1 foot is in that world, and then 1 foot is he's also this intergalactic police officer. At the end of the film Green Lantern First Flight, I really like that film. Sometimes I'll show my students that as an example of the Frontiersman. And at the end, he leads the whole corps in the Green Lantern, oath or whatever. And then he flies away, and they say, "Where are you going?" He's like, "I got to check in at my other job," because he's got to go back to Earth and show up for work. So he's got those 1 foot in each world. And again, a lot of heroes work from two different worlds. I mean, on one hand, you could say, well, doesn't Spider-Man, have 1 foot in each world like that? Yeah, to an extent of, being Peter Parker and being, Spider-Man. But what is far more prevalent in a character like Spider-Man is blurring boundaries, which is the trickster's, domain. So yeah, you're on the right track there. I did a whole video on the Frontiersman. If you do a search for Professor Geek Frontiersman, you'll see a video that maybe goes into a little bit more detail for you. Another super chat from you just elaborating. You said my thing is trying to think of the frontiersman is that I sometimes question if I'm thinking of a frontiersman or a trickster. Then again, I don't watch westerns a lot. I do watch Star Trek the OG series. Yeah, well, a trickster is trying to do away with the boundaries. A trickster is trying to say, well, where does that boundary really even exist? You watch Spider-Man and you wonder, well, I mean, is he a boy or is he a man? I mean, yeah, he's like 15, 16, but he's got the responsibility of a man on his shoulders. You see Spider-Man move and you're like, is he a human or a spider? There's not one definitive foot in either boundary which are definitively defined and separated. A trickster's going to blur that boundary so you don't really know where one begins and when the other starts. Hopefully that helps.